I used to believe that success was measured by the height of the buildings I designed, by the pristine lines of steel and glass reaching toward heaven like modern-day Babel towers. For 30 years, I had crafted that image. Thomas Reynolds, founding partner of Reynolds and Shaw Architects, the man who transformed Chicago's skyline. My clients trusted me with their millions, my wife Caroline adorned our social circles like a crown jewel, and our daughter Madison had just made partner at her law firm. Everything was perfect, or so I thought. That morning, as I stood in my corner office overlooking Michigan Avenue, watching the October sun paint the city gold, my world was still intact. The coffee in my hand was still hot, the taste of success still sweet on my tongue. I didn't know then that by sunset, the first crack would appear in the foundation of everything I'd built. "Tom, you need to see this." Marcus, my senior project manager, stood in my doorway. His face carried the kind of gravity I'd only seen once before, when we lost the Beijing contract that would have made us international players. He held a stack of papers in his trembling hands. I gestured him in, already feeling the weight of uncertainty pressing against my chest. "What am I looking at, Marcus?" "The structural analysis for the Riverside Tower project." He spread the papers across my desk, pointing to highlighted sections with a shaking finger. "These specifications, they're not what we submitted to the city. Someone altered them after final approval." The coffee turned bitter in my mouth. I knew every line of the Riverside Tower project. It was supposed to be my legacy, the crowning achievement of my career. 65 stories of architectural innovation that would redefine sustainable urban development. We'd broken ground 3 months ago. "That's impossible," I said, but even as the words left my mouth, I was scanning the documents, my architect's eye catching the discrepancies. Cheaper materials, compromised support structures, corners cut with surgical precision. Someone with intimate knowledge of our systems had orchestrated this. Who else knows? Just me, for now. I found it while preparing for the quarterly review. Marcus lowered his voice. "Tom, if these changes were implemented, we're looking at potential catastrophic failure within a decade. Hundreds of lives." I felt the room tilt slightly. In my mind's eye, I saw the tower rising from the riverside, not as a monument to innovation, but as a ticking time bomb. "Lock this down. Not a word to anyone, understand? I need time to figure out who's behind this." Marcus nodded and left, but the silence he left behind roared in my ears. I turned to the wall of awards behind my desk, crystal testimonials to a lifetime of integrity now mocking me with their sparkle. My phone buzzed, and Caroline's face lit up the screen. Her message read, "Don't forget dinner with the Shaws tonight. James says he has big news." James Shaw, my partner of 20 years. The man who'd helped me build this firm from nothing. The same man who'd handled most of the final paperwork for Riverside Tower while I was securing our West Coast expansion. My stomach clenched as pieces began falling into place with terrible clarity. I opened my private server, diving into project files I hadn't reviewed in months. With each document I opened, each timestamp I checked, the pattern became clearer. The changes hadn't happened all at once, they'd been implemented gradually, carefully, like a cancer growing unnoticed until it was too late. My phone buzzed again. This time it was an email from an anonymous account. "Your reputation is built on sand, Mr. Reynolds. How long before it all comes crashing down?" I sat back in my chair, feeling the leather creak beneath me. Outside my window, the city continued its daily dance, unaware that in this tower of glass and steel, a man's life work was beginning to unravel. The sun caught the edge of Riverside Tower in the distance, its incomplete skeleton reaching toward the sky like an accusing finger. Tonight, I would sit across from James Shaw at dinner. I would raise glasses with the man who might be orchestrating my destruction. I would smile and laugh while my mind raced to understand the depth of this betrayal. But first, I needed to make a call, to the one person who might help me navigate what was coming. I picked up my phone and dialed a number I hadn't used in 5 years. After 3 rings, a familiar voice answered, Detective Sarah Martinez. Sarah, it's Tom Reynolds. Remember that favor you owe me? I watched my reflection in the window, noting how quickly a successful man could start to look hunted. I think it's time to collect. As I hung up, my computer chimed with another anonymous email, Tick-tock, Mr. Reynolds. The truth doesn't stay buried forever. The sun dipped behind a cloud, casting my office in shadow, and in that moment, I realized that everything I'd built, my reputation, my legacy, my life's work, was balanced on a knife's edge. By the time the sun set tonight, I would either begin to unravel the conspiracy threatening to destroy me, or I would become its next victim. The real question was, how deep did this betrayal go, and was I prepared for the answer? The drive home that evening felt like navigating through a minefield of memories. Every familiar landmark along Lake Shore Drive seemed to mock me with reminders of projects James and I had dreamed up over 2 decades of partnership. The setting sun painted the sky in shades of blood and gold, a fitting backdrop for the theater of deception I was about to enter. Caroline met me at the door of our Lincoln Park mansion, her silk dress flowing like mercury in the dim light of our foyer. 28 years of marriage had taught me to read the microscopic shifts in her expression, the slight tightening around her eyes, the almost imperceptible downturn of her lips. "You're late," she said, adjusting my tie with practiced fingers. "And you look terrible. The Shaws will be here any minute." I caught her hand, holding it perhaps a fraction too tightly. "Caroline, if I told you everything we built might be at risk, would you stand with me?" She withdrew her hand slowly, her green eyes searching my face with an intensity that made me wonder if I'd already said too much. "What have you done, Thomas?" The doorbell's chime saved me from responding, but her question lingered like poison in the air between us. I watched her transform instantly into the perfect hostess, her doubt hidden behind a dazzling smile as she welcomed James and Catherine Shaw into our home. James entered with his usual commanding presence, his silver hair and tailored suit projecting the image of success we'd both cultivated over the years. But now I saw him through new eyes, searching for signs of the serpent beneath the expensive veneer. "Tom." His handshake was firm, familiar. "Wait until you hear what I've lined up for us. It's going to change everything." The irony in his words nearly made me laugh. Catherine Shaw drifted in behind him, all elegant angles and practiced charm. She kissed my cheek, her perfume a cloud of expensive memories. "Thomas, you look stressed. Still worried about that Riverside project?" The casual mention of Riverside sent ice through my veins. I managed a smile that felt like broken glass. "Just the usual pressures, Catherine. Shall we move to the dining room?" Caroline had outdone herself with dinner, her way of maintaining control when she sensed chaos approaching. The table gleamed with silver and crystal, each place setting a fortress of propriety. I watched James carefully as we took our seats, noting how his eyes flickered to his phone every few minutes. Before we discussed business, James raised his wine glass, a toast to partnerships that stand the test of time. The wine tasted like ash in my mouth. Beneath the table, my phone vibrated with a text from Detective Martinez, "Background check complete. Call me immediately. It's worse than you think." James was just telling me about this fascinating development opportunity in Singapore, Catherine announced, her voice carrying that peculiar resonance that always commanded attention. "Apparently, they're very interested in our sustainable design approach." Our sustainable design approach. The same approach that had been corrupted in the Riverside Tower plans. I studied Catherine's face, wondering if she was complicit or just another piece in James's game. "Singapore." Caroline's interest piqued visibly. "You never mentioned Singapore, Thomas." "That's because it's my surprise," James interjected smoothly. "The meetings are already set up for next month. They're specifically requesting Tom's involvement." The pieces clicked together with terrible clarity. Send me to Singapore, away from Chicago, away from Riverside Tower. A convenient absence while whatever plan they'd set in motion came to fruition. Actually, I set down my fork with deliberate care. I've been thinking we should focus on Riverside Tower. There are some interesting details in the final specifications I'd like to review. With you, James. The moment hung suspended like a drop of blood in water. James's smile didn't waver, but something shifted in his eyes, a predator's recognition of another predator's move. Of course, he replied smoothly. Though I thought Marcus handled most of those details. Marcus is very thorough, I agreed, watching James's left hand tighten almost imperceptibly around his knife. He brought some concerns to my attention just today. Catherine's laugh cut through the tension like crystal breaking. Please, no shop talk at dinner. James promised me a night free of architectural jargon. But Caroline was watching me now, really watching me, her caterer's smile slipping just enough to reveal the steel beneath. She'd always been sharper than I gave her credit for. My phone buzzed again, another anonymous email, checking the specifications. Too late, Mr. Reynolds. The foundation is already poured, and so are the secrets. Thomas, Caroline's voice carried a warning edge, why don't you tell everyone about Madison's latest case? The one about corporate fraud. Our daughter's specialty, corporate fraud litigation. Caroline's choice of topic wasn't accidental. I looked at my wife of nearly 3 decades and saw something I'd missed before. She'd been watching too, putting pieces together in her own way. The night stretched ahead like a tightrope over an abyss. Somewhere in this elegant dining room, between the clink of fine china and the flow of expensive wine, a battle was being waged in subtle glances and carefully chosen words. By dessert, I needed to understand not just the depth of James's betrayal, but how many others were involved in this elegant conspiracy. My phone hummed one final time. Detective Martinez, found the money trail. Shaw isn't working alone. Watch your back, and your wife. I raised my glass, meeting James's eyes across the table. Yes, let's talk about fraud, shall we? The night air bit into my skin as I stood on our terrace after the Shaw's departure, each breath a sharp reminder that I was still alive, still fighting. The city sprawled before me like a circuit board of light and shadow, each glowing window potentially hiding another thread in this web of betrayal. My guests' voices still echoed in my head, every casual phrase now subject to forensic examination in the darkroom of my mind. The dinner had ended with handshakes that felt like exchanges of weapons, kisses that carried the weight of secrets. James's final words, "We'll talk tomorrow about Singapore," hung in the air like a prophecy of doom. But it was Detective Martinez's warning about Caroline that truly gutted me, transforming my sanctuary into a labyrinth of doubt. I heard the soft click of heels on marble behind me. Caroline. My wife. My possible betrayer. Are you going to tell me what's really happening? Her voice carried that particular tone she'd perfected over decades, concern wrapped in steel. Or should I wait to read about it in the Tribune? I turned to face her, studying the elegant architecture of her features, features I'd woken up to for 28 years. How many secrets had that face kept from me? What do you know about the Riverside Tower specifications? Her expression shifted minutely, like watching hairline cracks appear in fine porcelain. I know that project is your legacy. And I know James has been making interesting phone calls lately. Interesting how? The kind that end abruptly when I enter the room at charity functions. The kind that Catherine pretends not to notice but watches like a hawk. Caroline moved closer, her perfume mixing with the night air. I also know there's a reason you've been reviewing old project files at 3 in the morning. The realization hit me like a physical blow. She'd been conducting her own investigation, parallel to mine. But to what end? Why didn't you tell me? Why didn't you tell me? Her counter was swift, practiced. We've built this life together, Thomas. Every brick, every foundation. Did you think I wouldn't notice when the cracks started appearing? I pulled out my phone, showing her the anonymous emails. When did you first suspect something was wrong? 3 months ago. Catherine mentioned Singapore then, too. Just a casual reference at the Symphony Gala, but her eyes. Caroline's voice hardened. I may be just a trophy wife to most of your associates, but I wasn't born yesterday. Just then, my phone lit up with a new message from Detective Martinez, meeting set with former Shaw and Reynolds employee. Says he has proof of systematic fraud going back years. Midnight. Navy Pier. Caroline read the message over my shoulder, her breath catching. Michael Crawford. The name hit me like a thunderbolt. Michael Crawford, our former chief financial officer who'd resigned suddenly last year. The official story was early retirement, but rumors had swirled about disagreements with James over project financials. How do you know it's Crawford? Because Catherine Shaw has been paying him to keep quiet. Caroline's words fell like bombs in the quiet night. But apparently, her payments recently stopped. My mind raced through implications, possibilities, betrayals layering upon betrayals. How long have you known about Catherine's payments? Long enough to make copies of the transfer records. She met my gaze steadily. Long enough to wonder when you'd finally see what was happening in your own company. The weight of her words pressed against my chest. Why didn't you come to me sooner? The same reason you didn't come to me today. Protection. She touched my face, her fingers cold against my skin. But protection might be a luxury we can no longer afford. My phone buzzed again, another anonymous email. Midnight meetings are dangerous, Mr. Reynolds. Some secrets are better left in the dark. Caroline read it and straightened her spine, transformation washing over her like a wave. Gone was the society wife, replaced by something harder, more primal. They're monitoring your phone. The question is who? James? Catherine? Or someone else entirely? There's another question you're not asking. Caroline's voice dropped to a whisper. Who altered those building specifications, Thomas? Really altered them? Because James Shaw doesn't know enough about structural engineering to make those kinds of changes. The implication knocked the breath from my lungs. Someone else. Someone with intimate knowledge of our projects, our systems, our security protocols. Someone who could move through our digital architecture as easily as I moved through my physical buildings. Madison, I breathed, the name of our daughter feeling like ash on my tongue. She had access. When she did the legal review for the permits. Caroline's face went white. Call Detective Martinez. Now. But before I could dial, my phone lit up with a new message. Not from Martinez this time, but from an unknown number, like father, like daughter. Shall we discuss what really happened to the Beijing contract? The night air suddenly felt colder, heavier with secrets yet to be revealed. In less than 12 hours, I'd discovered layers of betrayal that threatened to demolish everything I'd built. But as I stood there with Caroline, I realized this wasn't just about saving my legacy anymore. It was about uncovering the truth, no matter how ugly, no matter how deep the deception went. Even if it meant discovering that my own daughter was somehow entangled in this web of lies. The city lights flickered below us, each one a possible ally or enemy in the coming war. In just under 4 hours, I would meet Crawford at Navy Pier, if he lived long enough to make it there. And if I did. We need to move fast, Caroline said, her voice steady despite everything. But first, you need to hear what I found in Madison's old laptop. Because Thomas? This goes back much further than Riverside Tower. The night stretched before us like a dark mirror, reflecting back all our fears, all our suspicions. And somewhere in that darkness, the truth waited, a truth that threatened to destroy not just my legacy, but my entire family. The contents of Madison's laptop lay before us like a digital autopsy, each file a piece of evidence in a crime I hadn't known was being committed. Caroline sat beside me in my home office, her presence both comfort and catalyst as we peeled back layers of deception that had lived beneath our roof, breathed our air, shared our name. Look at the timestamps, Caroline murmured, her finger tracing across the screen. These modifications to the Beijing contract, they're from 3 years ago. Long before Riverside Tower. The revelation settled into my bones like winter frost. Our daughter, our brilliant, ambitious Madison, had been orchestrating financial manipulations through a Byzantine maze of shell companies and altered documents. The Beijing contract hadn't been lost, it had been sacrificed, deliberately torpedoed to set up something bigger. Something that led directly to Riverside Tower. She learned it from me, I whispered, the words tasting of ash and regret. All those nights I spent teaching her to read blueprints, to understand the architecture of power. I taught her how to build things. I never imagined she'd use those lessons to destroy. The clock on my desk showed 11:15 p.m. 45 minutes until the meeting with Crawford at Navy Pier. My phone had remained ominously silent since the last warning message, as if the very air was holding its breath. There's something else, Caroline said, her voice carrying the weight of another revelation. She opened a folder labeled Legacy Projects. Inside were detailed financial records, each one a carefully constructed piece of fiction. She wasn't working alone, Thomas. Look at the authorization codes. My eyes scanned the documents, understanding blooming like blood in water. The codes belonged to James Shaw, but they were dated from periods when I knew he'd been out of the country. Someone else had used his credentials. Someone with intimate knowledge of our security systems. Catherine, I breathed, pieces clicking into place with terrible precision. She's been using James's access all along. The Society Wife Act, all those charity functions, they were cover for something much bigger. Caroline's laugh held no humor. Catherine Shaw hasn't been just a society wife for a very long time. Did you know she has a master's in computer engineering? She buried it so deep I had to hire a private investigator to find it. The magnitude of the deception staggered me. While I'd been focusing on James, the real architect of my destruction had been moving pieces on a board I hadn't even known existed. And my own daughter was her willing apprentice. My phone suddenly came to life, a text from Detective Martinez, Crawford's not coming. Found him in his car outside his house. He's alive, but barely. Hospital says it looks like a stroke, but... The message trailed off, its implications clear as broken glass. They'd gotten to Crawford first. The question was, who were they? We need to move, Caroline said, already closing the laptop. If they took out Crawford, we're next on the list. But I remained seated, a new understanding crystallizing in my mind. No, I said slowly, they won't move against us yet. They need me to go to Singapore first. The Riverside Tower specifications, they're not the end game. They're just the beginning. Caroline's eyes met mine, sharp with comprehension. A test run. For something bigger in Singapore. I stood, moving to the window. The city sprawled before me, a glittering testament to human ambition and greed. They needed to prove they could alter building specifications without detection. Riverside Tower was never meant to fail, it was meant to succeed. To establish a pattern they could replicate internationally. With you as the fall guy if anything went wrong. Caroline's voice carried a blade's edge of anger. But why Madison? Why turn our own daughter against you? The answer came to me with the clarity of a mathematical proof. Because she was the perfect weapon. Who better to destroy a man than the daughter he trusted completely? The protégé he trained himself? My phone buzzed one final time that night, an email from Madison herself, Dad, we need to talk. Alone. Tomorrow morning, your office, 7 a.m. No police, no mom. Just you and me. It's time you understood what this is really about. I showed the message to Caroline, watching emotions war across her face, love, fear, rage, determination. It's a trap, she said softly. Of course it is. I felt a smile spread across my face, not of happiness but of grim resolution. But I taught Madison everything she knows about architecture. Everything except one thing. What's that? That before you can build something truly magnificent, I said, turning to face my wife, you have to be willing to tear everything down to its foundations. Even if what you're demolishing is your own life's work. The night pressed against the windows like a living thing, full of secrets and threats and possibilities. In 7 hours, I would face my daughter across the battlefield of my own office. But first, I had preparations to make. Because while Madison had learned how to build from me, she was about to learn something else, how it feels when a master architect decides to bring the whole structure crashing down. The game was no longer about saving my legacy. It was about choosing which pieces of it to sacrifice in order to expose the rot at its core. And if that meant destroying everything I'd built to save what really mattered, well, some lessons a father never wants to teach his daughter. But teach her I would. Dawn bled across Chicago's skyline like a wound refusing to heal, painting my office tower in shades of accusation. I stood at my window, watching the city awaken while something inside me calcified into diamond-hard resolve. In 30 minutes, I would face Madison, my daughter, my protégé, my betrayer. The thought crystallized in my chest like frost on glass, beautiful and lethal. The night's revelations had transformed me. Each piece of evidence from Madison's laptop had been another brick in the wall of my reconstruction, building me into someone I barely recognized, someone capable of architecting destruction rather than creation. The irony wasn't lost on me. I'd spent my life creating spaces that reached toward heaven, and now I was preparing to bring my own paradise crashing down. The cameras are ready, Caroline's voice came through my phone, steady as bedrock. We'd spent the night positioning our own pieces on this chessboard of betrayal. Every angle of your office is covered. If she tries anything. She won't, I interrupted, watching my reflection transform in the glass. Not physically, at least. Madison's weapon has always been truth, twisted, reformed, and weaponized. Like father, like daughter. The bitter laugh that escaped me echoed in the empty office. How many times had I praised her sharp mind, her ability to see the patterns others missed. I'd been so proud of how she'd learned to navigate the labyrinthine world of corporate power, never realizing she was building her own maze within it, with me as the unwitting prey. My phone buzzed with a message from Detective Martinez. Hospital reports Crawford's condition stabilizing. He's talking. Says he needs to show you something about Catherine Shaw's past. Something from Singapore. Singapore. The word thrummed through me like a plucked wire. Every architectural masterpiece needed a foundation, and I was beginning to see the true blueprint of this conspiracy. Catherine Shaw hadn't chosen Singapore by accident, she was returning to the scene of her first creation. I pulled up the files Caroline's investigator had uncovered about Catherine's hidden past. Before she'd buried her identity beneath society galas and charity functions, she'd worked for a Singapore-based tech firm specializing in infrastructure systems. The same firm that had mysteriously collapsed after a series of catastrophic accidents involving their building projects. The elevator chimed, and I felt Madison's presence before I saw her, the weight of destiny settling around my shoulders like a familiar coat. I didn't turn around. You taught me that every great building needs a story, her voice carried the same confident precision I'd always admired. A narrative that justifies its existence in the skyline. And what's the story you're telling with Riverside Tower? I asked, still watching her reflection in the glass. The one where hundreds of people die when it collapses. Don't be dramatic, Dad. She moved into the room like she owned it, another trait she'd learned from me. Riverside Tower isn't going to collapse. It's going to stand as a monument to everything you taught me about power and its architecture. I turned then, facing the stranger wearing my daughter's face. Catherine Shaw recruited you 3 years ago, didn't she? Right after you handled the legal work for the Beijing contract. Something flickered in Madison's eyes, surprise, perhaps, or respect. Catherine showed me the truth about legacy. About how men like you and James build empires on promises and shadows, while women like us are expected to smile and nod and play our decorative roles. And the Singapore Project? Another monument to female empowerment through architectural terrorism. Terrorism. Madison's laugh was knife-sharp. No, Dad. Revolution. Do you know how many women architects have been erased from history? How many Catherine Shaws have watched men take credit for their innovations, their genius? The pieces locked into place with terrible clarity. Catherine designed Riverside Tower. The original design, before James and I ever saw it. 10 years ago, Madison confirmed, a fierce pride in her voice. Before she married James, before she learned to play the society wife. He stole it from her, modified it just enough to claim it as his own. Sound familiar, Dad? Like maybe the Peterson complex in 2010? Or should I ask Mom about that? The accusation struck like a physical blow. The Peterson complex, my first major project, the one that had put Reynolds and Shaw Architects on the map. The one Caroline had contributed to during her brief architectural career before I'd convinced her to focus on our family instead. You're not here to expose the truth, I said, understanding blooming like blood in water. You're here to offer me a choice. Singapore is happening with or without you, Dad. The question is whether Thomas Reynolds ends his career as a visionary who championed women in architecture, or as the man who built death traps across 2 continents. My daughter, my brilliant, ruthless daughter, stood before me offering redemption through surrender. The perfect symmetry of her revenge made my heart ache with perverted pride. Before I answer, I said, moving to my desk, let me show you something about the true architecture of power. I pressed the button that would send every file from Madison's laptop to the SEC, the FBI, and every major news outlet in Chicago. You forgot the first lesson I taught you about building, Madison. Her expression shifted from confidence to dawning horror as alerts began flooding her phone. Always check the foundation before you try to add another floor. The dawn had fully broken now, painting the city in unforgiving light. In the distance, Riverside Tower rose like a prophecy of things to come. But prophecies, like buildings, could be reconstructed. And as I watched my daughter's carefully built plans crumble around her, I felt the weight of new blueprints taking shape in my mind. The game wasn't over. It was simply entering its final, devastating phase. I stood in the ruins of my empire, watching the morning sun ignite a firestorm across Chicago's glass canyons. The media wolves were already circling, phones throughout the building chirping with news alerts about the scandal erupting at Reynolds and Shaw Architects. My daughter had fled my office an hour ago, leaving behind the acrid taste of betrayal and the hollow echo of everything I'd failed to teach her about true power. The irony carved into me like a sculptor's chisel. I'd spent my life creating spaces that would outlive me, never realizing my true legacy would be destruction. But there was beauty in demolition too, a kind of terrible poetry in watching false foundations crumble to reveal hidden truths. Catherine Shaw is trying to board a flight to Singapore. Detective Martinez's voice crackled through my phone. CBP is holding her at O'Hare. And James. James just walked into the FBI field office with his lawyer. I closed my eyes, feeling the weight of victory settle like ash on my tongue. And Madison? Gone to ground. But with the evidence you released. Martinez paused, and I could hear the respect mingling with concern in her voice. You've burned down your own house to catch the arsonists, Tom. Was it worth it? The question hung in the air like smoke, forcing me to confront the true cost of my revenge. I thought of Caroline, who'd stood beside me through the long night, helping me dissect our daughter's betrayal with the same precise grace she'd once used to design buildings. I thought of Madison, who'd learned too well the lessons I'd never meant to teach about ambition and its price. My phone buzzed with a new message, from Crawford, finally conscious and talking. There's more. Singapore wasn't the end. Catherine had plans for projects in Dubai, Shanghai, London. A whole network of compromised structures, each one a testament to stolen dreams and buried names. I moved to my desk, pressing the button that would send the second wave of revelations to the waiting world. Not just Madison's files this time, but everything, the complete archaeology of betrayal that Caroline and I had excavated through the night. Every project Catherine had ever touched, every design she'd had stolen, every woman whose architectural dreams had been buried beneath the foundations of men's ambitions. Dad! Madison's voice behind me, strong despite its tremor. She'd returned, facing the consequences of her choices with the same steel I'd always admired. You don't understand what you're destroying. No, Madison. You don't understand what I'm building. I turned to face my daughter, seeing in her eyes the reflection of my own ruthless determination. Catherine taught you about revenge, but I taught you about architecture. What's the first principle of any great design? She answered automatically, the student still responding to her teacher, form follows function. And the function of this destruction? I gestured to the chaos unfolding around us. Is rebirth. Understanding dawned in her eyes as my phone projected the next press release onto the office walls, the announcement of a new architectural initiative, funded by the Reynolds fortune, dedicated to identifying and promoting women architects whose work had been stolen or suppressed. The Peterson Complex would be the first project reassigned to its true creator, Caroline Reynolds. You're rewriting history, Madison whispered. I'm correcting it. I moved to the windows, watching Riverside Tower catch the morning light. Catherine was right about one thing: too many women have had their designs stolen, their dreams buried under men's names. But her answer was to destroy. Mine is to rebuild. And me? Madison's voice carried the weight of everything we'd lost. What happens to the daughter who betrayed you? The question cut through me like winter wind through a broken window. I turned back to her, seeing not the conspirator of the past 24 hours, but the little girl who used to sit on my lap, tracing building plans with tiny fingers. You'll face the consequences of your actions, I said, my voice steady despite the earthquake in my heart. But once the dust settles, there's a provision in the initiative's charter. A path for young architects to reclaim their integrity through supervised restoration projects. Rehabilitation through reconstruction, she said softly, understanding the metaphor as only my daughter could. If you want it. I held her gaze, offering not forgiveness, not yet, but possibility. Sometimes the only way to truly honor a legacy is to tear it down and build something better in its place. The sun had fully risen now, painting Chicago in colors of revelation and renewal. In the distance, cranes were already moving at Riverside Tower, beginning the process of inspection and correction. Catherine Shaw would face justice, not just for her recent crimes but for decades of architectural theft. James would learn the price of being complicit in the burial of women's dreams. And I would begin the long process of rebuilding, not just buildings this time, but the broken trust between father and daughter, the fractured legacy of an industry built on stolen designs and buried names, the shattered foundation of a family nearly destroyed by revenge. Caroline's voice came through my phone, strong and clear, the press is gathering in the lobby. Are you ready? I looked at Madison, seeing in her face the same mix of determination and regret that I felt in my own heart. Yes, I said, understanding that this answer was about more than just a press conference. It's time to show the world what happens when we build on truth instead of lies. The elevator doors opened, ready to take us down to face the consequences of our choices. As Madison and I stepped in together, not as conspirators or enemies now, but as architects of a different kind of future, I realized that sometimes the greatest legacy a father can leave is not the empire he builds, but the truth he's willing to uncover, no matter the cost. The doors closed on the office where I'd spent 30 years building my legacy. But as we descended toward whatever waited below, I understood that legacy, like architecture, was never really about the structures we build. It was about the foundations we choose to build them on.